The microphone popped like a small gunshot, and the sound hit my right ear clean, then died into a low, ugly hum. Old speakers, old wood, old air. The town hall smelled like coffee that had been reheated too many times and damp wool from coats packed shoulder to shoulder. Fluorescent lights washed everyone the same pale color, erasing class and softness. Behind the dais, a civic banner hung crooked. Safety, education, community. As if words could hold up walls. I sat in the front row of invited guests, hands folded, spine straight, wearing a plain blazer that didn't advertise rank. The name tag on my lap read, Maya Brooks, in thick black marker, the kind of label people used when they wanted you human-sized. On the stage, the moderator adjusted papers and smiled like this was going to be orderly. A police captain spoke about school drills. A counselor spoke about online radicalization. The room nodded at the right places, murmured when prompted, stayed polite in the way civilians did when they believed danger was something you discussed, not something you met. They had asked me to attend as community liaison. They had asked for my presence more than my voice. I accepted that, I always had. Because my work, civil military operations, was built on restraint. You didn't win trust by taking the microphone. You won it by listening, then acting quietly when no one was watching. The podium microphone sat there like a small, tempting weapon. Its red indicator light blinked once, then went steady. The hum under it never fully disappeared. In the second row, my mother sat near the aisle, hands clasped in her lap so tightly the knuckles looked pale under the lights. Helen Brooks kept her chin lifted, eyes forward, face composed. She didn't wave at me. She didn't need to. Her presence was her bravery. Then I saw him stand. Frank Dalton rose from the middle section, not in a hurry, not apologetic. He wore a pressed button-down and a jacket that made him look civic, respectable, concerned. He held himself like a man who believed the room owed him space. The moderator's smile tightened. "Sir, we have a list." Frank lifted one hand, palm out, as if he was calming a room that hadn't asked him to. "It'll be brief," he said. His voice carried. He didn't need the microphone. The hum from the speakers turned into background, every head angled toward him in the way crowds did when they smelled conflict, curiosity dressed as citizenship. I didn't move. Frank's gaze found me immediately, sharp and certain. He pointed, not with anger, but with a kind of ownership that made my skin go cold. "There she is," he said. I felt my mother's shoulders stiffen. I didn't look at her. If I looked at her, I'd have to feel what she felt. I couldn't afford that in public. Frank's finger stayed aimed at me like a verdict. "She's no hero," he said. 3 words. Clean. Cutting. The room shifted. Chairs creaking, a cough swallowed. The fluorescent lights seemed louder. The air felt thinner. Frank took a breath and added the line he'd been saving for years, the one he believed would shrink me back into a daughter-sized shape. "She chose the army over family." 6 words. A story he could sell. The town hall went silent, not the soft silence of respect, the hard silence of moral shock, the kind that pressed against your ears and made you aware of every breath you took. I didn't flinch. I kept my hands folded. I kept my face neutral. I let the insult sit in the room without feeding it. Because Frank didn't want truth. He wanted reaction. He wanted me to argue so he could call it disobedience. He wanted me to defend myself so he could call it arrogance. He wanted the crowd to see a soldier out of control. He wanted to rewrite history into something that made him look like the man who had tried to save my mother from me. The moderator blinked rapidly, stunned into protocol. "Sir," she said, voice thin, "this is a forum on..." "This is about safety," Frank cut in, louder now, using the banner behind the dais like a shield. I said, "It's about values." Values. Another costume. He turned his body slightly so the crowd could see him better, so the cameras that had come for civic footage could find a new angle. "My stepdaughter sits there, he continued, like she represents honor." He let the word honor hang, then twisted it. "She represents abandonment." The word hit, and I heard someone inhale sharply. A woman near the back whispered, "Oh my God." A man in a baseball cap frowned like he'd come for policy and got a family trial instead. My right ear caught all of it. My left ear, fine, intact, caught the quieter things. My own pulse, the slight tremor in the air conditioning vent, the small click of a pen someone stopped tapping. I kept my gaze forward. I didn't grant Frank the satisfaction of seeing me bleed. He took a step toward the aisle, still pointing, still owning the narrative. So, she wants you to believe she's protecting you, he said, but she couldn't even protect her own home. My jaw tightened once, then eased. He was careful. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't foaming. He was doing what he always did, weaponizing calm, making cruelty sound like concern. The moderator looked toward the police captain for help. The police captain stared back, unwilling to become the bad guy who silenced a concerned citizen. No one intervened. And that was the point of a town hall. Civilian judgment space, no chain of command, no rank to hide behind. Only the crowd. Frank's eyes never left me. He smiled faintly as if he'd already won. He leaned into the silence like it belonged to him. "I'm not saying she's a bad person," he said, voice smooth. He always said that before he did something bad. "I'm saying stop calling her a hero." His gaze swept the audience as if he was inviting them to join his version of the world. "Stop teaching our kids," he added. "That service means leaving." He turned back to me and delivered his last cut, quiet enough to feel personal, loud enough to be public. "She left when we needed her." 6 words. A lie with clean edges. My hands stayed folded. I didn't correct him. Not because I couldn't. Because I knew what my correction would cost. It would pull my mother into the center. It would turn her life into evidence. It would make the crowd choose between policy and pain. Frank wanted that. Frank lived for that. He wanted to force my mother to pick him again, publicly, so he could keep his dominance intact. I didn't give him the fight. I looked at the podium microphone instead, the small cylinder of metal and foam sitting unused, waiting to be handed to whoever was loudest. Its cable ran down into the stage like a vein. The red light glowed steady, muted, but alive. A symbol of voice that wasn't mine right now. The moderator swallowed and tried again. "Mr. Dalton, Frank raised his hand. "One more thing," he said. "Of course." He turned slightly toward the crowd, voice dropping into something that sounded almost wounded. "My wife, her mother, has been alone for years," he said. "While Maya," he used my name like a tool, "collected praise from people who don't know what it costs the family." He nodded once, as if he'd proven a theorem. "Some of us stayed." There it was, his real motive, not morality, not safety, control. He needed to be the one who stayed, the one who held the family together, the one who could claim sacrifice without ever stepping into danger. He needed me diminished, so his presence looked like virtue. The silence in the hall tightened. I felt it like pressure against my ribs. Then I felt something else. My mother's gaze. Not on Frank. On me. I didn't look back, but I could feel her courage gathering in the small place between her hands and her breath. Frank turned back to me, finger still pointed. "Well," he demanded, sharp now. "Say something." 8 years ago, that demand would have worked. It would have yanked my heart into my throat. It would have made me scramble for the right sentence, the one that saved my mother from his anger. But I was 40 now, a lieutenant colonel. A woman who had negotiated ceasefires with people who carried rifles like opinions. A woman who had learned that speaking at the wrong time didn't clarify truth. It buried it under noise. I lifted my chin slightly. I said nothing. My silence wasn't surrender. It was discipline. Frank's nostrils flared. He took another step, emboldened by my restraint, mistaking it for weakness. "See?" he said to the crowd, spreading his hands. "No answer." The moderator glanced at me, pleading silently for me to rescue her agenda. The police captain's jaw clenched. A teacher near the back shifted in her seat, expression tightening. The crowd was still silent, but it wasn't empty silence anymore. It was waiting. Frank didn't notice. He didn't know the difference between fear and judgment. He thought any quiet room belonged to him. He pointed again, higher this time, as if he could pin me to the chair with his finger. She wears her service like a shield, he said. But in this town, he paused, savoring the moment. We choose family. The words hung in the air, and in that hanging I noticed the smallest thing. The podium microphone's cable trembled slightly as if someone behind the dais had brushed it, an accidental touch that made the foam head wobble. Voice unsettled. Crowd still. My mother's hands unclenched for the first time all night, fingers opening slowly in her lap, as if her body was preparing to stop obeying fear. Frank's finger remained aimed at me, steady, accusing. And then, for the first time, I saw it hesitate. Just a fraction. Like even his certainty could feel the room changing shape. The silence in that town hall didn't scare me. It reminded me of a different silence, one that had started years earlier with a folded flag and a door that wouldn't open again. I had been 17 when my father died, and the memory of that day still came back in fragments. The dull thud of boots on our front porch, the metallic smell of rain on a uniform coat, the way my mother's hands shook as she reached for the doorknob like it might burn her. The officer's mouth moved, but my brain caught only the shape of the words, not the meaning, until my mother made a sound I'd never heard before. Small, torn, animal. After that, our house went quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. The refrigerator hummed too loud. The clock ticked like it was angry. Even the air felt thin, like grief had eaten oxygen. My mother tried to keep us upright. Helen Brooks could make dinner with trembling hands. She could smile at neighbors with eyes that didn't sleep. She could do practical things, paperwork, bills, casseroles, because the alternative was falling apart. Then Frank Dalton appeared like a solution. He was friendly at first, helpful. He offered to fix a loose step, to carry groceries, to take care of things. He laughed at the right places. He used the word family like a blanket, and my mother, my exhausted, lonely mother, wrapped herself in him because warmth is hard to refuse when you've been cold too long. Frank didn't hit. He didn't scream. He didn't need to. He controlled with tone, with timing, with the kind of calm that made everyone else feel unreasonable for having feelings. By the time I turned 18, the walls of our home had changed. Not visibly. The paint stayed the same. The furniture stayed where it had always been. But the air had a new rule. Frank's comfort came first. I joined the Army that year, not for medals, not for applause, because after watching my father die in service, I couldn't live in a house where the word service became something we tiptoed around. I couldn't stand the way grief had turned into avoidance, how everyone spoke about my father like he was a story you told gently so it wouldn't wake the baby. I wanted to understand the world that took him. I wanted to be useful inside it. When I told my mother, we were standing in the kitchen under a flickering light that made her look older. The room smelled like dish soap and reheated coffee. I'm enlisting, I said. Her face went blank, then tight. Her hands gripped the counter edge. Frank, sitting at the table with a newspaper he wasn't reading, looked up slowly. He didn't shout. He smiled faintly, like I'd made a childish announcement. That's not happening, he said. 4 words. Absolute. My mother's eyes darted between us, panic building like steam. It's my decision, I said. Frank's smile didn't move. You're emotional, he said. 2 words that tried to erase me. I kept my voice small, controlled. I'm committed. Frank leaned back, tapping the newspaper once. The paper made a soft crackle, loud in the quiet kitchen. The Army teaches you to disobey, he said. 7 words, clean poison. My mother flinched at disobey like it was a threat to her fragile peace. I looked at her. Mom, I'm not leaving you. Frank cut in, quick. You already are. 4 words that hit harder than yelling. That was his gift, making choices sound like betrayal. My mother cried that night behind the bathroom door. I stood outside it, listening to the muffled sound of her sobs and the steady rush of the shower she'd turned on to hide them. Frank walked past me in the hallway, bare feet silent on carpet, and murmured without stopping, Don't make her choose. 4 words. A cage. I learned early that my love for my mother could be weaponized. Frank didn't need to win arguments with me. He only needed to make my mother pay for them. So I started paying attention to what mattered. Not what he said in public, what he did in private. He lost my recruitment papers once. He forgot to tell me about a meeting. He asked my mother to talk sense into me while he stood behind her like a shadow. He never touched me, never threatened me directly. He just pushed his influence into every corner until resisting him felt like harming her. And still, I joined. Because something in me refused to let fear be the family's religion. Basic training taught me discipline, not disobedience. It taught me to speak with purpose and to stay quiet when noise would kill. It taught me that leadership wasn't volume, it was steadiness under pressure. Frank hated that. Every time I came home on leave, he tested the edges. He'd greet me with a grin and a line short enough to cut. "Still playing soldier?" he'd say. 3 words. Small cruelty. I didn't correct him. Not because I didn't have words, because I had learned what he wanted. A reaction big enough to paint me as the problem. I kept my voice level. "I'm serving." 2 words, no bite, no explanation. He'd snort like service was a hobby, then turn to my mother and say, softer, "She's changing." 2 words that sounded like warning, and my mother would shrink, not because she didn't love me, but because Frank had trained her to hear conflict as danger. Mini turn. The first time I made captain, I called home from a secure line at midnight. The base hallway smelled like floor wax and cold air. The line rang twice before my mother picked up, breathless. "Maya," she whispered. "I got promoted," I said. She inhaled sharply. "Oh." Behind her, I heard Frank's voice, muffled. "Who is it?" My mother hesitated, just long enough for me to feel it. "It's Maya," she said. Frank's tone came clearer then, calm and sharp. "Tell her we're sleeping." 6 words, command dressed as reason. My mother's voice went smaller. "Honey, can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the concrete wall in front of me, lights buzzing overhead. "Sure," I said. She didn't ask about my work. She didn't ask if I was proud. She didn't say she was proud. She said, "Be safe." Then she hung up too quickly, like the connection itself was a risk. I stood there for a long moment, phone in my hand, and understood something that changed how I survived my family. Frank didn't need to stop me from serving. He only needed to stop my service from existing inside our home. So he rewrote me. In his version, I was never disciplined. I was distant. Never calm. I was cold. Never committed. I was selfish. And my mother, exhausted and afraid, let him tell it because the alternative was admitting she lived with a man who competed with her daughter's honor. I became a lieutenant colonel anyway. Not through spectacle, through years of quiet work, civil military operations in places where misunderstandings killed faster than bullets. I learned to read communities, to build trust, to de-escalate before the first stone got thrown. I learned the power of letting people feel heard without giving away your center. Those skills made me effective. They also made me dangerous to Frank. Because Frank's dominance depended on one thing: being the loudest moral voice in any room my mother sat in. The Army didn't teach me to disobey. It taught me to recognize coercion, and Frank was coercion wearing a family name. Still, I stayed quiet around him for years, strategic quiet, not submissive quiet, because my mother lived in the crossfire. Every time I pushed back, she paid. Not with bruises, with stress, with sleepless nights, with that hollow, scared look that made me feel like I was 12 again, watching her try not to collapse. So I swallowed truth for her. I let Frank call me absent. I let him joke that my uniform made me hard. I let him tell neighbors I was always gone, like that meant I didn't care. Sometimes in the kitchen, my mother would try to repair the gap with small gestures: extra food on my plate, a hand on my shoulder, a quiet, "I'm glad you're home," when Frank wasn't in earshot. And I would take those crumbs and treat them like a meal, because love is complicated when it's living under someone else's control. The night of the town hall, before we drove there, my mother had stood at her bedroom mirror adjusting her scarf. The lamplight made the room warm, and the air smelled like her perfume, clean, floral, trying too hard. "I don't want trouble," she'd said. I'd kept my voice gentle. "Then don't invite it." She'd looked at me through the mirror, eyes tired. "Frank asked me to come," she admitted. That was another truth. Frank didn't just want to shame me. He wanted witnesses. He wanted my mother seated in the room so he could force her into silence while he spoke for the family. I nodded once. I'll sit quietly, I said. My mother's shoulders loosened, relieved by my promise of restraint. She didn't know restraint was also how I fought, because restraint made space for other people to see what Frank really was, without me having to label him. Back in the town hall, his finger had hesitated midair, sensing the crowd's shift. He couldn't name it. He couldn't control it. And I knew why. Frank had spent years telling a private story where he was the guardian and I was the threat. But a public room had its own instincts. Civilians didn't obey family hierarchy. They obeyed what felt true in their gut. All I had to do was not contaminate that gut truth with my own defense. So I stayed still. I let his words hang. And as the silence thickened, I noticed what Frank didn't. A teacher in the back row tightening her lips. A veteran near the aisle sitting straighter. A teenage girl with a notebook pausing mid-sentence, eyes narrowed like she was hearing manipulation for the first time. The crowd was starting to think. Frank had always controlled my mother's environment. He'd never controlled the town's conscience. My mother's breath became audible in the quiet. One shaky inhale, then a slow exhale, as if she was preparing to do something she'd never done in public. Endure his anger without rescuing him. Frank, sensing his control slipping, sharpened his voice. "Tell them," he said, pointing at me again. "Tell them you chose duty over blood." 8 words. A trap. I didn't speak. I didn't blink. Because the truth didn't need my mouth to survive. It needed time. Frank's jaw tightened. And somewhere behind him, in the hush he'd created, a chair creaked as someone shifted forward, like the crowd itself was about to find its voice. Frank's finger stayed pointed at me, but his eyes moved over the room like he was counting allies. The town hall lights buzzed faintly overhead. The air felt warmer now, thick with bodies and withheld opinions. Someone near the back unwrapped a mint, and the crinkle sounded indecently loud in the hush he'd made. He didn't wait for the moderator's permission anymore. He had discovered something intoxicating. A civilian room had no chain of command to pull him back. "You want safety?" he said, voice smooth. "Ask her about Rockford." The name hit the room like a dropped glass, small, sharp, unmistakable. Rockford wasn't a person. It was a neighborhood. Low income, flood prone. The place politicians visited in raincoats for photo ops, then forgot the moment after the sun came back. A few heads turned toward me. Others turned away, as if looking at me would make them responsible for the moral weight Frank was placing on their laps. Frank's tone stayed gentle, which made the accusation sound reasonable. "She signed the order," he said. "That moved families out." 7 words. A clean blade. A low murmur rose from the chairs, confused, hungry. It wasn't outrage yet. It was the sound of a crowd trying to decide what story it was being handed. He leaned toward the center aisle like he was offering the room a gift. "Kids pulled from schools," he added. "Elders displaced." 4 words. 8 words. He kept them short because short lines traveled farther. I felt my mother stiffen in the second row. I didn't look at her. I could picture her hands anyway. Clenched, pale, trying to stay invisible. Frank's eyes narrowed slightly, pleased with the reaction. He pointed again, not at me this time, but at the podium microphone. "And she sits there," he said, "as if she belongs up front." The microphone's red light glowed steady. A tiny eye that didn't blink. Its hum lived under everything, a constant reminder that voice could be given and taken with a switch. I breathed in slowly. The air smelled like burnt coffee and wet coats. I tasted metal at the back of my throat, the familiar edge that arrived when restraint was doing heavy labor. Rockford. He was twisting an operation into a betrayal. There had been flooding that year, record rainfall, a river that climbed past its banks like it had decided it hated boundaries. I'd been assigned as the civil-military liaison. We'd coordinated evacuation routes, shelter logistics, infrastructure assessments. We'd made calls under pressure with incomplete information. Some people had been moved, not because we wanted them gone, because the levee was failing, because staying meant bodies. Frank didn't say that. He didn't need to. His version was more useful. a cold soldier signing paperwork that broke the community. I watched the moderator's face tighten into panic. She glanced at her agenda like paper could save her from a live moral trial. Mr. Dalton, she began, we're going to. Frank cut her off with a polite smile. It's relevant, he said. 2 words disguised as righteousness. He turned to the crowd and spread his hands. Tell me, he asked, do we want that kind of person teaching civics? A few people laughed nervously, the way crowds did when they weren't sure if they were allowed to be angry yet. Someone whispered, Is that true? Someone else whispered, I heard about Rockford. The whispers layered, becoming a tide. I felt the room's attention shift from policy to spectacle. Frank wanted me framed as a villain without giving me the courtesy of defense. He wanted the community to do his work for him, isolate me, shrink me, make me too controversial to be heard. I had seen this tactic in unstable regions overseas. Discredit the mediator, then claim the conflict was unsolvable. People did it when they needed someone to blame but didn't want to do the hard work of understanding. Frank was doing it in a town hall with a banner that said community. I kept my face composed. Then I stood. The chair legs scraped softly against the waxed floor. The sound carried, and the murmurs dipped for a beat as the crowd adjusted to motion. My mother's breath caught, an involuntary little gasp I felt more than heard. I didn't look at Frank. I looked at the moderator. Madam Chair, I said, voice calm, abai. May I respond? 8 words. No heat, no drama. Frank's mouth twitched with triumph. He wanted this. He wanted the optics of me arguing in public. The moderator swallowed, eyes darting to her agenda again. The fluorescent light made sweat on her upper lip shine. We can't, she said. Her voice was thin, apologetic, like she was begging me to accept my own silencing as a favor to her evening. This isn't on program. Not on program. The phrase landed heavier than any insult. It was the bureaucratic version of a muzzle. The room could hear the accusation, but not the answer. Frank's smile widened. He didn't laugh. He didn't have to. He lifted his palms slightly, a gesture of mock fairness. See, he said. 1 word, a verdict. A few murmurs rose again. A man in the 3rd row muttered, That's not right. A woman near the aisle shook her head slowly, uncomfortable but still quiet. The moderator looked at me with pleading eyes. We have limited time, she whispered. Limited time for truth. Unlimited time for damage. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs, not anger, not humiliation. Clarity. This wasn't about Rockford, it wasn't about safety. It was about control, Frank's control, exercised in the one place my rank couldn't override him. I stayed standing for 1 more beat. The microphone sat above the dais, ready, unused. The red light blinked once, then steadied. My voice had always been measured. It had never been loud, but this wasn't measured. This was confiscated. Frank leaned toward me, just enough for his words to cut without being shouted. Sit down, he said. 2 words, too familiar. My jaw tightened once. I forced it loose. I could have fought. I could have demanded. I could have made a scene that proved exactly what Frank wanted, that I was military in a civilian space, that I didn't respect process, that I was dangerous to community values. So I did the harder thing. I sat. The chair welcomed me like a cage, its metal edge pressed cold against the back of my legs through my trousers. My hands folded again in my lap, fingers steady. The crowd watched the way crowds watched a person being restrained. Half curious, half relieved it wasn't them. Frank turned back to the room, energized by my compliance. You heard it, he said. No denial. 3 words that tried to make silence equal guilt. The moderator cleared her throat, voice shaking. Let's return to... Frank ignored her. He raised his voice slightly, still controlled. She broke Rockford, he said, and she'll break this. 7 words. A prophecy he wanted to become reality. The murmurs thickened. Not everyone believed him, but belief wasn't required for damage. Suspicion was enough. I kept my gaze on the podium microphone. Unsigned. Unclaimed. sitting there like a test. That mic represented public trust, the right to speak in a community space. And right now, the community was letting a man weaponize it while denying it to the person being accused. The crowd was complicit, not out of malice, out of inertia. I watched my mother in my peripheral vision. Helen's shoulders were rigid. Her hands were clasped, but I noticed something new. Her fingers weren't squeezing as hard. She was listening. She was watching Frank. She looked tired of being managed. Frank's voice rolled on, words tightening, shaping a narrative that painted him as protector and me as threat. Then a small sound cut through it. A chair creaked in the back row, slow, deliberate. Someone stood. I didn't turn yet, but I felt it. The way you felt pressure shift before a storm. The room's attention wavered. The murmurs faltered. Frank paused mid-sentence, annoyed. Sit, he snapped toward the back. 4 letters. Ugly. The person didn't sit. A second chair creaked. Another person rose. The crowd began to change shape. Subtle, quiet, like a conscience waking up. I kept my hands folded. I kept my face calm. I didn't claim the microphone. Because I didn't need to argue my truth. I needed the room to find its own. A voice from the back, female, steady, cut through the hum. I was in Rockford, she said. Frank froze. And I felt, for the first time that night, the crowd's weight shift off my chest, like the truth had finally found another mouth. I was in Rockford, the woman said again, louder. Her voice didn't shake. It carried the kind of steadiness you only heard from someone who had already lived through the worst part of a story and didn't need anyone's permission to remember it. The fluorescent lights bleached her face pale, but her eyes were sharp. She stood in a worn cardigan, hands at her sides, shoulders squared like she'd decided fear didn't get to run this meeting anymore. The room shifted toward her, heads turning, breath catching, that low ocean sound of a crowd recognizing a new center of gravity. Frank's finger dropped halfway, then snapped back up as if he could reassert control with motion. Sit down, he barked. 2 words, too ugly, the woman didn't sit. I'm a teacher, she said. Rockford Elementary. A murmur rippled. Someone whispered, that's Ms. Alvarez. Frank's smile tightened into something thin. That's not the point. 6 words, sharp, defensive. Ms. Alvarez didn't look at Frank. She looked past him, toward the dais, toward the moderator like she was asking the room itself to be honest. The point, she said, is you're lying. 1 sentence, no theatrics, a clean cut. The moderator's lips parted, then closed. Her hands hovered over her agenda pages like paper could still pretend it was in charge. Frank laughed once, short, brittle. Prove it. 2 words, a trap. Ms. Alvarez didn't flinch. The flood, she said. 1 word, and the room went colder. I felt the memory in my body before she finished. Not because I wanted to relive it, because some events left grooves in you the way water left grooves in stone. Miss Alvarez raised her chin. The river rose overnight, she said. We had kids inside. Her voice didn't soften when she said kids. It hardened, like she was refusing to let sentiment turn this into a sob story. I called 911, she continued. No one could reach us. A few people nodded, remembering that week. The town had turned into a map of blocked roads and worried phone calls. And then, she said, your stepdaughter came. The air changed at the word came. The crowd leaned forward without meaning to, hungry for something more truthful than Frank's tidy accusation. I stayed seated, hands folded, face composed. The hum under the microphone still lived in the speakers like a trapped insect. Ms. Alvarez pointed, not at me, not accusing, just anchoring the narrative. She came in a truck with high clearance, she said. No lights, no show. That was accurate. That was how we'd moved, quiet, efficient, because noise panicked people faster than water did. She carried a little boy, Ms. Alvarez continued, up to her chest. My right ear caught every syllable. My left ear caught the softer things, the room's intake of breath, the tiny squeak of someone's chair as they leaned forward. She didn't ask our names, Ms. Alvarez said. She asked where the exits were. The crowd murmured. That line sounded like me because it was me. Frank shook his head violently, trying to shake her story loose. She had help. 3 words. Diminishing. Ms. Alvarez's eyes flashed. She led. 2 words. Final. A ripple ran through the room, small but real. The crowd wasn't clapping. It wasn't cheering. It was recalibrating. Frank's voice sharpened. That doesn't erase Rockford. 5 words, desperate to yank the room back to his script. Ms. Alvarez didn't raise her volume. Rockford wasn't erased, she said. It was saved. 6 words that landed like a hand pressed flat on a table. Someone else stood, an older man near the aisle, ball cap low, jaw set. He didn't look like a man who enjoyed public speaking. He looked like a man who'd spent years swallowing things he didn't want to taste. I was there too, he said. Another chair creaked. Another person rose behind him. The crowd started to stand in pockets, people who had been waiting years for permission to contradict the loudest person in a room. Frank's eyes darted, alarm growing under his control mask. This isn't testimony time. 4 words, trying to restore procedure now that truth had found momentum. The moderator swallowed and whispered into her mic. Please, order. But the microphone was still just a tool. The room had chosen something older than order. Memory. The man in the ball cap spoke again. Name's Daryl Hines, he said. Volunteer fire. He didn't look at Frank. He looked at the crowd. When the river rose, Daryl said, the levee was failing. A hush spread. Even the people who hadn't been there understood the word levee. They'd seen the photos. They'd watched the news. They'd known it had been bad. She coordinated the evacuation, he said, and his voice tightened on the word like he was holding back anger at how easily Frank had rewritten it. If she hadn't, we'd have bodies. A woman near the front covered her mouth. A teenager stopped recording, phone lowering as if the weight had finally become real. Frank stepped forward, palms lifted, his tone shifting into faux reasonable. I'm not saying she didn't do a good deed, he said. 8 words, carefully within reasonable. He paused, then aimed the blade. I'm saying she destroyed homes. 5 words, simple, sharp. Daryl's eyes narrowed. Homes float, he said. Bodies don't. 4 words. Cold, true. The crowd murmured again, louder now. Not applause, agreement waking up. Minnie turned. A woman in the 3rd row rose slowly, one hand on the chair back as if steadying herself. She was older, hair silver, posture stiff with the effort of standing. Her voice came out dry, controlled. My sister lived in Rockford, she said. Frank's mouth opened, ready to redirect. Ma'am. She cut him off. Don't ma'am me. 3 words. The room went still again, not for Frank, for her. My sister refused to leave, she continued. She said she'd rather drown than move. A few people winced. Stubbornness was familiar in small towns. Pride could be a life raft until it became an anchor. And you know who sat with her, the woman said. Until she agreed. She pointed toward me, not accusing, not begging, just placing truth where everyone could see it. She did. 2 words. Heavy. Frank's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His face flushed, the calm mask cracking. That's propaganda, he snapped. 2 words, reckless. The room reacted. Soft sounds, disapproval, the crowd's mood turning from uncertain to protective. Ms. Alvarez's voice came again, steady. This is memory. 3 words. Unkillable. Frank tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. He stepped closer to the aisle, his voice rising just enough to reveal desperation. You all don't live with her, he said. 6 words. He wanted the room to remember, I'm family. He pointed at me again. She left her mother. 4 words. Familiar cut. A few eyes flicked toward my mother in the 2nd row. Helen Brooks didn't stand, she didn't speak. But she did something I'd almost forgotten she could do in public. She stayed. Her hands unclenched. Her fingers rested flat on her knees, palms down, as if she was practicing stillness against the urge to fix, to soothe, to rescue Frank from consequences. Frank noticed. His eyes flicked to her, startled that she wasn't automatically backing him. He turned back to the crowd, voice sharper. "She thinks she's better," he said. 4 words, ugly and revealing. The moderator finally found her voice. "Mr. Dalton, please." Frank ignored her again. "She made us small." 4 words, too honest. And there it was, the real motive slipping out. Not morals, not policy, ego. The crowd sensed it. You could feel it in the way people leaned back as if they didn't want his grievance on their clothes. A man near the wall stood up, broad shoulders, close-cropped hair, a veteran's posture that never really left. He didn't wear a uniform. He didn't need to. "I served," he said simply. Frank sneered. "Then you should understand." 4 words trying to recruit him. The veteran shook his head once. "I understand sacrifice, price. You understand control." 7 words. Surgical. A few people nodded hard. A few murmured, "That's right." The room wasn't cheering, but it was aligning. Frank's jaw clenched. He took a step back, then forward again, unable to choose retreat or dominance. "She signed the relocation," he insisted. 4 words, clinging to his original weapon. The veteran's voice stayed calm. "She coordinated," he corrected. "You're twisting." 5 words. Frank's face tightened. "You don't know her." 4 words. Petty. The veteran pointed to his own chest. "I know her work." 3 words. Final. I remained seated, hands folded, chin level. I could have stood. I could have taken the microphone. I could have delivered a clean timeline of Rockford, levee failure probabilities, evacuation routes, shelter capacity, casualty projections. I could have made the room understand with data. But this wasn't a briefing. It was a reckoning. And the room didn't need my defense. It needed Frank's mask to slip far enough that people could see what I'd lived with for years. A man who called his need for dominance family values. Frank tried a different angle, quieter, almost pleading now as if he could shame the crowd into backing off. "My wife suffered," he said. 3 words. True, but weaponized. The crowd's eyes flicked again to my mother. Helen didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't perform. She just sat there, present, refusing to be used as his shield. That refusal was louder than any microphone. Frank's voice tightened. "She stayed home alone." 4 words, trying to paint me as the villain again. A woman near the front, nurse scrubs under her coat, stood and said softly, "We all stayed home." 4 words. Simple, deflating. "And some of us still needed her," the nurse added, pointing toward the crowd, not toward me. "Out there." 2 words hit the room. Needed her. The crowd began to murmur with a different tone now, less gossip, more recognition. Frank's control slipped another inch. He began talking faster, saying more than he meant to. "She loves the attention," he blurted. 4 words, petty. A few people actually laughed, short, disbelieving bursts, because nothing about my posture screamed attention. I hadn't even taken the mic. Frank heard the laughter and panicked. "She thinks she's righteous." 4 words, too emotional. The moderator reached for the microphone switch, fingers trembling. "We're going to move on." But Frank wasn't done exposing himself. "She came back different," he said. "Cold. Unreachable." 3 words, then 2. He was unraveling. Ms. Alvarez's voice cut through again, calmer than his. "Maybe she came back disciplined." 4 words. Frank snapped his head toward her. "Discipline is cruelty." 3 words. The room went still. Even Frank seemed to realize, half a second too late, that he'd said the quiet part out loud. Because only a controlling person believed discipline was an attack. The veteran in the aisle leaned forward slightly. "No," he said. "Discipline is restraint." 4 words. The crowd hummed with agreement. I felt my heartbeat stay steady. I kept my gaze on the podium microphone, the red light still glowing, still unused. Voice and crowd. The motifs sat in front of me like 2 doors, one I could force open, one the room was opening on its own. Frank's voice grew smaller, more frantic. "You're all being fooled." 5 words. weak. A teenager near the back, same girl with the notebook, stood up and said, blunt and clear, "No, we're finally listening." 5 words. Brave. Frank's mouth opened. No line came out. For the first time all night, he looked like a man who couldn't find a script that worked on a room that had stopped obeying him. And in that widening gap between his accusation and the crowd's awakening, I felt something shift that had nothing to do with rank. It was civilian judgment, alive and unbought. I stayed seated. I stayed silent. Because the truth was already speaking through the people Frank had underestimated. The moderator's hand hovered over the microphone switch again. And this time, the room didn't wait for her. A murmur swelled into something sharper, like wind catching a loose banner, and I felt the whole hall tilt away from Frank's control. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone's coffee breath drifted past me, bitter, stale. The podium microphone's red light kept glowing, steady and unused, as if it had decided it wouldn't dignify this with sound. Frank looked around, confused by the shift. He had always mistaken silence for submission. He didn't recognize the moment when silence became judgment. "Enough!" he snapped. One word, too loud. The crowd didn't quiet. They didn't roar either. They did something worse for a man like Frank. They started choosing who to listen to. Ms. Alvarez remained standing, arms at her sides, shoulders squared. Daryl from Volunteer Fire stayed upright, jaw set. The veteran in the aisle didn't sit back down. The teenager with the notebook kept her eyes locked on Frank like she was watching a lesson unfold in real time. Frank tried to reclaim the mic without touching it. "You're being manipulated," he said. 3 words. Weak. A woman in scrubs shook her head once. "We're remembering," she replied. 2 words. Heavy. Frank's face flushed. He pointed at me again, his favorite lever, trying to drag the room back to the easiest target. "She won't even deny it," he said. 6 words. A trap. The moderator's hand hovered over her switch. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. She looked like she wanted someone else to solve this for her. No one did. Not me. Not the police captain. Not the school counselor. The crowd solved it the only way a crowd could, by refusing to let one man's story overwrite their lived reality. A man near the center aisle stood with slow effort, one hand braced on the chair back. He wore a simple work jacket, hands calloused, nails dirty, in a way that told the truth about his life. "I lost my house in Rockford," he said. His voice was quiet, but the room bent toward it anyway. Frank pounced, relieved. "Exactly!" One word, hungry. The man didn't look at him. He looked toward the front row, toward me, but not like worship, like accounting. "I hated that day," the man continued. "I hated everyone." A few people nodded. Hate was easy to recognize. It was familiar. "But," he added, "I'm alive." 2 words that made the room colder. He turned his head and finally looked straight at Frank. "You're selling pain," he said. 3 words, clean. Frank scoffed. "I'm telling truth." 3 words, thin. The man's lips pressed together. "Then tell all of it," he replied. 4 words. Frank opened his mouth, then shut it. He didn't have all of it. He only had the part that made him look righteous. The veteran in the aisle spoke again, calm and precise. "Rockford was a choice," he said. "Flood was not." 6 words, no drama. The crowd murmured, agreement, not gossip now, a sound like a door unlocking. Frank's composure cracked a little more. He stepped forward, palms open, tone shifting into faux parental. "Listen," he said. "I'm her family." 4 words, the last card he always played. And that, finally, pulled my mother into the room without her speaking. Heads turned toward Helen Brooks in the second row. My mother sat very still, hands palm down on her knees. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes didn't flick to Frank the way they used to. She looked straight ahead, like she'd decided she wouldn't be used as his evidence anymore. Frank saw it. His gaze snagged on her. His voice faltered for half a beat, then he pushed harder, desperate. She left you, he said, staring at my mother. 3 words, a knife. My mother's chin trembled. She didn't speak. She didn't defend him, she didn't defend me either. She just stayed present. Silent witness choosing courage through stillness. That silence, hers, did something Frank never expected. It made space. And in that space, someone else rose. A woman with silver hair stood near the back, leaning lightly on the chair in front of her, as if she didn't trust her knees but trusted her truth. Her coat was buttoned wrong. Her eyes were wet, but her voice came out dry, controlled. If she was wrong, the woman said, why are we still alive? The sentence fell into the room like a stone dropped into water. No one answered at first, no one could. Because it wasn't a rhetorical line, it was a moral verdict. Frank blinked rapidly. Ma'am. Don't, she cut in. One word. Final. She lifted a trembling hand, not accusing, not dramatic, and pointed toward the front. My grandson was on that roof, she said. The water was climbing. Her breath hitched once. She recovered. And she climbed too. A hush spread, the kind of hush that didn't avoid discomfort, accepted it. Frank shook his head hard, trying to dislodge reality. You're glorifying her. 4 words. Petty. The woman's voice stayed steady. We're acknowledging what happened. 5 words. Frank's mouth tightened. His eyes darted around the hall, searching for someone who would rescue his authority. The moderator looked trapped. The police captain looked tired. The crowd looked awake. The silver-haired woman took one small step forward, as if she were approaching a line she'd never crossed in public before. You don't get to rewrite survival, she said. 6 words. A boundary. Then she turned, not toward me, but toward the room. And you don't get to sit quietly, she added, while he does it. 8 words. And that was the spark. Chairs scraped. Not one. Dozens. People stood. Not slowly. Not politely. A collective stand that rose like a wave, sudden and undeniable. The sound of it was loud in its own way. Fabric shifting, chair legs protesting, bodies moving in unison without a single instruction. Then the cheers came. Not polished applause, not military cadence. Civilian cheers, raw, relieved, grateful, angry at having been lied to in their own building. A teacher clapped hard. A veteran nodded once, jaw clenched. The nurse in scrubs raised her hands and clapped above her shoulders like she was trying to make her gratitude visible. Even the teenager with the notebook smiled, small, fierce, like she'd just learned what public courage looked like. The podium microphone remained unused. The crowd didn't need it. Frank stepped back as if the noise had physical force, his face drained of color. His hands lifted, palms out, trying to slow the moment, trying to regain control with gesture. Stop, he said. 1 word, powerless. No one stopped. The cheering wasn't for me as a symbol, it was for the truth as a correction. A room reclaiming itself. I stayed seated. My hands remained folded. I didn't nod, I didn't smile, I didn't wave, I didn't take the microphone. Because the moment didn't belong to my ego. It belonged to the people who refused to let a family grievance masquerade as civic virtue. Frank's eyes locked on mine. Panic and fury mixed. He tried one last cut, quieter now, aimed like a needle. You're enjoying this, he hissed. 3 words. Wrong. I answered with 4, calm enough to reframe reality. I won't argue, I said. Listen. 2 sentences. 6 words total. The line didn't punch him. It freed the room from needing me to perform. Frank's jaw worked as if he had more words, but the cheers swallowed him. His voice couldn't compete with a crowd that had chosen its conscience. He looked toward my mother again, begging without saying it. My mother didn't stand, but she did something louder. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip wasn't tight. It wasn't possessive. It was simply there, warm, steady, present. For years, Frank had tried to turn family into a weapon against me. Now, without a single word, my mother turned family into a quiet truth. I had never abandoned her. She had been trapped between fear and love, and tonight she finally chose love without fear's permission. Frank stumbled back another step. He brushed a chair with his hip and it scraped loudly. He flinched as if even furniture was judging him. The room kept standing. The applause kept coming, hands meeting hands in a relentless rhythm. And in the middle of all that civilian noise, I felt something settle inside me, calm and clean. He spoke against me. They stood for the truth. Frank turned toward the exit. The open door at the back of the hall showed a slice of cold night air and a dark hallway beyond. He hesitated there for half a second, like he couldn't believe he'd been pushed out of a room he thought he owned. Then he walked through alone. The door didn't slam. It just swung slowly behind him, letting in a thin draft that smelled like rain and asphalt. Fresh, honest air. The crowd's cheers softened, not into silence, but into conversation. People turning to each other, voices low again, shaking their heads, whispering, "I didn't know. And I remember Rockford. And he had no right." I stayed seated a moment longer, feeling my mother's hand in mine, feeling the absence of Frank's voice like a pressure released. On the dais, the moderator stared at her agenda pages as if they belonged to another universe now. And the podium microphone, still glowing red, waited, unused, as if it had finally learned what honor sounded like when it didn't need a speech. The applause didn't end with a bang. It thinned, like rain tapering off, until all that remained was the low murmur of people turning back into themselves. Chairs scraped, coats rustled, someone laughed once too loud from relief, then swallowed it. The room smelled like stale coffee and damp wool, and the fluorescent lights made everyone's faces look a little guilty, like we'd all participated in something we hadn't planned. The moderator stood at the dais, blinking at her agenda as if the paper had betrayed her. The podium microphone still glowed red, humming softly under everything, a living reminder that it had been used as a stage prop and not as a tool. Frank was gone, not dramatically, not dragged out. He had simply walked through the open exit door at the back like a man stepping out of a room that no longer recognized him. The door had swung behind him and let in a thin draft that smelled like wet asphalt. My mother's hand stayed in mine. Helen's palm was warm, slightly damp. Her grip careful, present without possession. For years, her touch had been apologetic in public, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to claim me when Frank was watching. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like choice. A man in the third row leaned into the aisle and said, "He had no right." Another person answered, "He wanted to control the room." People were speaking in the plain language they used when they realized manipulation too late and hated it. Ms. Alvarez walked down the aisle toward the front. She didn't look at me with fanfare. She looked at me like a teacher finishing a lesson. "You okay?" she asked softly. I kept my voice small. "I'm fine." She nodded, satisfied by the lack of performance. "Rockford remembers," she said. Two words hit like a steadying hand. Rockford remembers. Daryl from Volunteer Fire came up behind her, cap in his hands, the brim twisted from habit. "Ma'am," he said, then stopped, unsure what to call me in a town hall that had just rejected titles. "Daryl," I said, keeping it human-sized. He nodded. "Sorry he did that." "I know," I replied. No speech, no absolution, just acknowledgement. The police captain approached the moderator and murmured something I couldn't hear, but I saw the way the moderator's shoulders sagged in relief at being given an exit. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the microphone. The speakers popped once, sharp, unpleasant, and then her voice came through, thin but determined. "Thank you," she said. "We're ending tonight's forum early." A collective exhale moved through the room, like everyone had been holding a breath since Frank pointed at me. "Please exit calmly," she added. And it sounded almost funny now, as if calm was something you could request after a room had chosen its conscience out loud. People began to file out in clusters. Shoes thudded on the wooden floor. The door hinges squeaked with each opening, letting in cold night air in quick slices. A few people approached me with tentative faces, wanting to say something, afraid of saying it wrong. I didn't invite speeches. I nodded. I listened. I let them keep their dignity too. A teenager with a notebook stopped near my row. She looked like she'd just learned something that didn't fit in a textbook. "My dad was in Rockford," she said. "He never talks." I kept my answer within what the moment could hold. "Some stories are heavy." She swallowed and nodded like that was permission to respect silence instead of fearing it. My mother squeezed my hand once, light, steady, and I felt her trying to do the same thing, respect my silence instead of filling it. We waited until the aisle cleared. Only then did I stand. My knees didn't pop, my posture didn't shift. I rose the way I'd risen in briefing rooms and field tents and flooded gymnasiums, quietly, without asking the room to notice. The crowd had already noticed what it needed to notice. As we moved toward the exit, I passed the dais. The microphone sat there with its red light still on. It had been the weapon Frank wanted me to grab. I walked past it without touching, and the hum behind it sounded smaller than it had earlier, like even the machine understood it had lost its power to force a fight. In the lobby, the air changed, colder, cleaner. The scent of rain and asphalt came in through the opening doors. The town hall's old bulletin board hung by the wall, layered with flyers for bake sales and CPR classes and neighborhood watch meetings. Ordinary life trying to stay ordinary. Near the coat rack, I saw Frank's empty chair from the meeting room through the doorway, a small gap where his body had been, now filled with nothing. It looked harmless without him in it. That was the lie of control. It always looked harmless after it left. We stepped outside. Night air slapped my cheeks cool and wet. Streetlights threw pale cones on the sidewalk, and the wind tugged at my blazer sleeve like it wanted to pull me towards something unresolved. People lingered on the steps in small knots, talking in low voices. A few glanced at my mother, then at me, then away. Polite, uncertain. They weren't sure what to do with a family rupture that had spilled into a civic space. I didn't ask them to do anything. I didn't need them to crown me. They'd already done the only thing that mattered. They'd refused to let Frank's story become the town's story. My mother and I walked to the parking lot together. The asphalt was slick from a recent shower, reflecting streetlights in trembling streaks. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm chirped once and stopped. A flagpole rope clinked faintly against metal in the wind, the same steady sound as the hall's chair legs. Small, persistent truths. Halfway to the car, my mother spoke for the first time since she took my hand. "I didn't stop him," she said. Her voice was quiet, not self-pitying, just honest. I didn't look at her face. I looked at our hands, hers still holding mine, not as a chain, as a choice. "You stayed," I said. 2 words. Reality reframed. Her breath caught. "I was afraid." "I know," I answered. She nodded, eyes shining under the streetlight. "He wanted me to pick," she whispered. I kept my voice calm. "Love isn't a vote." 5 words. Final. Gentle. She swallowed hard and kept walking, as if that sentence had given her spine back one bone at a time. At the car, she fumbled for her keys, hands shaking. The key ring clinked too loudly in the quiet parking lot. She paused, inhaled, steadied her fingers, then opened the driver's door. She didn't rush inside. She stood there for a beat with the door open, cold air curling around the seat like a breath. "He's going to be angry," she said. I didn't answer with comfort that lied. "He already is," I said softly. My mother's eyes closed for a brief second, then opened with something new in them. Acceptance without surrender. "I'm tired," she whispered. I nodded once. "Me too." We got in. The car smelled like fabric softener and the faint vanilla air freshener my mother always hung from the mirror. A small domestic attempt at control. The heater kicked on with a low whoosh, warm air hitting my hands and making me notice how cold my fingers had been. My mother started the engine. It turned over with a steady purr, and for a moment we sat in that vibration, 2 people letting the world settle back into motion. She didn't turn the radio on. She didn't fill the silence with chatter. She just drove. Town hall lights receded behind us, the street outside blurred with rain sheen and street lamp glow. At a red light, my mother's hand drifted off the wheel for 1 second and rested on the center console, near my knee without touching. A near touch, a question. I placed my hand there too, lightly the way she'd held mine, present without possession. The light turned green. She drove on. We didn't talk about Frank again on that drive, not because we were avoiding it. Because we had both learned something in the same hour. Some battles ended not with winning words, but with a room refusing to be owned. When we reached my mother's street, the houses sat dark and ordinary, lawns glistening faintly under porch lights. The world looked like it had never heard cheers, never heard accusations, never heard the sound of a man losing control. My mother parked. She kept her hands on the steering wheel for a long moment, knuckles pale again, not from clenching, from bracing. Then she released them slowly, palms open, like she was practicing a new way to exist. "I'm sorry," she said, barely audible. I didn't give her a speech. I gave her a line that kept dignity intact. "Stay with the truth," I said. 6 words, a direction, not a punishment. She nodded once, firm. Inside the house, it smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. Quiet. Safe. The kind of safe Frank had always claimed he was protecting. But now I could feel the difference between safety and silence. My phone vibrated in my pocket, one controlled buzz that didn't care about family drama or town hall cheers. The screen lit up with a base number I hadn't saved under a name. Work didn't wait for applause. I stared at the glow for one beat before answering, and in that small pause I understood the cleanest truth of the night. Frank had tried to take my voice. The crowd had lent me theirs, and now duty was calling again, steady as a hum under a microphone. The phone's vibration felt louder than it should have in my mother's quiet hallway. Warm air from the heater still clung to my hands. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood, her version of safety, polished and contained. Outside, rain tapped the window with thin, impatient fingers. I looked down at the screen. A base number. No name, no softness. I answered. "Brooks." A pause, then a steady voice. "Ma'am, we need your guidance on tomorrow's civic liaison brief." Tomorrow. As if tonight hadn't happened. As if a town hall hadn't turned into a courtroom with folding chairs. "I'm en route within the hour," I said. "Copy, ma'am." The call ended cleanly. No condolences. No questions. Duty didn't do emotions. It did timing. My mother stood near the kitchen doorway, hands folded loosely in front of her like she was afraid any sudden movement would make the night come back. Her eyes were tired, but steadier than I'd seen in years. She didn't ask me to stay. She didn't ask what they needed. She didn't ask about Frank. She just watched me put my phone away as if she was learning that love sometimes looked like letting someone walk out the door without making it a test. "I'll pack a bag," I said. Her voice came small. "You already live packed?" 6 words. Not accusation. Recognition. I nodded once, and the nod felt like agreement with something bigger than the sentence. In the guest room, my duffel waited under the bed like it had never really been put away. Fabric rasped as I pulled it out. The zipper sounded harsh in the quiet house. I moved with practiced economy. Uniform items, laptop, notebooks, field charger. The little things that kept a day from turning into chaos. From the hallway, I heard my mother's soft steps, slippers dragging faintly, then the clink of a mug on the counter. The smell of chamomile rose, sweet and thin. I didn't ask for it. She didn't offer it. It simply appeared at the edge of my life the way support was supposed to, without demanding a speech. My phone vibrated again. A new number, unknown. I didn't answer immediately. I stared at the screen for a beat, letting myself consider what it might be. Then it stopped. A voicemail icon appeared. I knew before I pressed play. Frank. I listened with the volume low, the way you listen to threats in a controlled room, not to feel them, to assess them. His voice came through tight and contained, like he was still trying to sound righteous even in defeat. "You embarrassed us. You ruined this family." 7 words, then 4. Both meant to cut. I deleted the message without replying. No counterattack, no correction, no argument. I had learned overseas and at home that some people didn't want an answer. They wanted a hook. I wasn't biting anymore. When I walked back into the kitchen, my mother was sitting at the table, hands wrapped around the mug. Steam curled up and disappeared. The overhead light made her look older, but not smaller. "I heard him leave a message," she said quietly. "I deleted it," I replied. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "He'll be angry." I kept my tone calm. "He already was." She nodded once, accepting the truth without trying to cushion it. Her fingers loosened around the mug, then tightened again, then loosened, like she was practicing not turning fear into grip. I don't know what happens now, she admitted. I didn't romanticize it. You'll feel pressure, I said. Her eyes lifted to mine. To fix it. Yes, I said. She flinched. Not from me, because she recognized herself. I added softer. You don't have to fix a lie. Her eyes shined, and she looked away quickly, ashamed of how long she'd lived inside that word. The house was quiet again. No cheering, no accusations, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock, ordinary sounds that didn't care about public moments. I shouldered my duffel. My mother stood and walked me to the front door. The porch light cast a small, yellow circle on wet pavement. Outside, the street was empty, reflecting light in thin, trembling streaks. At the threshold, my mother's hand hovered near my sleeve, the old instinct to hold on. Then she stopped it. Her fingers folded back into her own palm, restraint learned in real time. I'm sorry, she said once. I didn't answer with a speech. Stay present, I said. 2 words that meant, don't disappear behind him again. She nodded, firm enough to surprise herself. I stepped into the night air. Rain smelled clean and metallic. My breath came out pale. Behind me, the door didn't slam. It closed softly, like she didn't want to turn my leaving into punishment. Mini turn. Halfway down the driveway, my phone lit again. This time a text from Miss Alvarez. You did right staying quiet. The room needed to hear itself. I stared at the sentence for a beat, then slipped the phone back into my pocket. Not because I didn't appreciate it, because I didn't need to carry praise to stay whole. I drove out of the neighborhood with the heater low and the windshield wipers steady. The road's wet sheen turned every streetlight into a blurred ribbon. My mind tried to replay the town hall, the pointing finger, the denied response, the standing crowd. But I didn't let it become a victory lap. I treated it like what it was, a corrective moment in a civilian space that didn't belong to me. At a red light, I saw my reflection faintly in the rearview mirror. Calm eyes, tight jaw, the same face that had sat through his words without reacting. I remembered the microphone's steady red light, humming uselessly while the truth spoke from the back row. I remembered the way chairs scraped when people stood, not for rank, not for uniform, but for a reality they'd lived. Frank had wanted to own the room. The room had refused. The light turned green. I drove. When I reached the base gate, the world changed the way it always did. Less civilian noise, more structure. Concrete barriers, security cameras, a guard's flashlight sweeping across my windshield. The smell of wet pavement mixed with diesel and antiseptic. The guard checked my ID, nodded, and waved me through without comment. The gate arm lifted like a quiet permission. Inside, everything was lit by utilitarian halogens that made night look like day with the warmth removed. The parking lot was nearly empty. Wind rattled a chain-link fence somewhere, a thin metallic chatter. I carried my duffel into the building, boots echoing softly in the corridor. The air smelled like floor wax and stale coffee. Familiar, unromantic. A place where people didn't pretend duty was glamorous. In my office, my desk lamp clicked on with a small snap. The light pooled over a stack of folders and an open laptop. My nameplate sat at the corner, LTC Maya Brooks, simple black letters on a strip of metal. I sat down and opened the first folder. Civilian Liaison Brief. School District Coordination. Emergency Response Framework. The work was plain on paper. It was also what kept towns from breaking when the next crisis arrived. My pen scratched against paper as I made notes. The sound was steady, controlled. A private kind of voice. I thought about Frank's accusation. She chose the army over family. He'd wanted that sentence to mean I was selfish. He'd never understood that the army hadn't replaced my family. It had given me a way to serve people whose families were about to be shattered. It had taught me to hold steady when others shook, to keep calm when rooms turned cruel, to let truth breathe without forcing it through my throat. Another mini turn. An email popped up on my screen, an attachment from Public Affairs, a link to a local clip already circulating. Not the full form, not the policy discussion, just the moment Frank pointed and the crowd stood. I didn't click it, I archived it. Not denial, discipline. Watching it would turn the night into a loop. I didn't need a loop. I needed tomorrow. I typed a short message to my team. Brief move to 0700. Be prepared. Keep it civilian-centered. Then I leaned back and listened to the building's quiet. Air vents whispering. Distant footsteps. The soft ping of an elevator arriving somewhere down the hall. No cheers here. No accusations either. Just the steady world that required me to show up whether my stepfather approved or not. I opened a blank report template and began writing, hands moving with the same calm they'd had in that front row. Subject: Community Forum, Observations and Recommendations. Summary: Increased civic tension, high misinformation susceptibility. Recommend local trust-building measures and trauma-informed engagement. I kept it clean. No mention of Frank, no mention of my family, not because it didn't matter, but because this report wasn't a diary. It was a tool. Halfway through, my phone vibrated once more, a text from my mother. No apology, no explanation, no attempt to make me soothe her. Just 3 words. I stayed quiet. I stared at the screen until my chest loosened a fraction. That was courage in her language. I replied with 4 words, "Thank you for staying." Then I set the phone face down and finished the report. At the bottom, I signed it the way I always did. Steady, unembellished. M. Brooks, Lieutenant Colonel, USA. My signature looked the same as it had yesterday. It would look the same tomorrow. Frank couldn't rewrite ink on official paper any more than he could rewrite what Rockford remembered. I shut the folder, turned off the desk lamp, and sat for a beat in the dim glow from the hallway light seeping under my office door. I didn't need my family to believe me. I needed to live in a way that kept other people from being left behind. Some people lose their voice when the truth speaks for itself.